for quite a good presentation. Colleagues, I must indicate that in terms of the time, we're not doing good, so that as we proceed, we'll be aware, so that we'll be concise. The next presenter is Mr. Muswema from CSIR on the opportunities for local economic development, the case studies. It's also presenting virtually. Over to you.
Morning, colleagues. Apologies for my voice. I sound like I'm talking in a can, an empty can. It's because I've got the sinus, but please bear with me. I'll do my best. Let me just put this on presentation mode. Can I get a thumbs up if I'm audible from somebody?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, I can see you.
Thank you, colleagues. Much appreciated. So this presentation is twofold. It's on two low-hanging fruit in the province. And the first opportunity is a look at food waste. The second one being green bricks. So this is just the contents of the presentation, two presentations. We'll talk to the food opportunities first. So in terms of food waste, most of this is disposed of at landfill site. If indeed it is even disposed at landfill site. And the problem is that this food waste, when it breaks down under anaerobic conditions, it produces methane, which is a huge greenhouse gas. So the black soldier fly can mitigate these climate impacts. We did a study for the KZN Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs. It was during the height of COVID, and we were looking at opportunities for organic waste that could be beneficiated by small, medium-sized enterprises. That study also identified a number of food waste opportunities in the province. So it estimated quantities, the spatial distribution, and which could also be used by the SMMEs. This is one example. The dumping that occurs at landfill sites. This is another example, the food waste produced by prisons in KZN. Another example, private hospital opportunities, public hospital opportunities, independent boarding schools throughout KZN. There's an opportunity with food waste. Public boarding schools as well, which are located in KZN. There they are. So the status quo is follows. The CSIR has a collaboration agreement with an SMME based at the Use It beneficiation site in Hammersdale. And we're studying this black soldier fly. In other provinces, Cape Town appears to be the leader, where they're implementing very large-scale projects. And there are some small-scale projects as well there in the Western Cape. Gauteng has some small-scale projects, but of course the Western Cape is championing the large industrial treatment technology option. Our collaborating partner, Bagology, Currently, as of today, they are processing 3 tons of food waste per month, and they produce 120 kg of frass and 600 kg of lava. So this is the black soldier fly. The left-hand side, that is the lava. And if you remember how we grew up on the farms, the chickens on the farms used to eat anything and everything. In fact, if you remember well, they used to eat worms, bugs, all sorts of critters that they could find. The extreme right is what comes out of the black soldier fly. And I don't know if I don't know um, uh, our premier if anybody has heard the term where there's waste, there's money. But this stuff is an organic fertilizer. It's an extremely good organic fertilizer. As you can see, very palatable and a very, very good protein replacement. Some of the other opportunities which we can talk to are the protein meal, chitin, which is the exoskeleton of the larva, and that has huge industrial applications. The frass, which is the poop which comes out of the back end of the grub, that is a very, very rich fertilizer. The grubs themselves, which are very high in protein, and of course the oil. So this graph is simply stating the 5 challenges with regards to food waste, the environmental and climate impacts, circular economy and waste opportunities that are going amiss, which we aren't capitalizing on. Thirdly, the underdeveloped opportunities for SMMEs. We need to get this technology out and into the public domain. We need to replicate this technology. Waste pickers and risks from improperly managed disposed food waste. That's a challenge because as we know, 80 to 90% of the recyclables in South Africa are collected through waste pickers. The rising cost of living, there were some newspaper reports where people were observed actually consuming food that was being dumped or food that had passed expiry date. This is just showing you a depiction of Cape Town and the scale that they've taken the black soldier fly, creating up to 72 jobs in one single plant. This is an example of our modular plant at Hammersdale Use It Waste Beneficiation Center. At this site, we are dealing with 3 tons of food waste in a month. This is the internals. So just to conclude on this food waste issue, we need to revisit some of those food waste opportunities that we had identified as opportunities for food waste, and we need to confirm the physical availability of stock. We've submitted a proposal for some funding for the black soldier fly through the DSTI, and that is to document the feed conversion, breakdown, and the workings of the facility that we have at Use It. The intention is to link food waste in modular containers throughout KZN, close to the source where the food waste is being produced. So this is the first opportunity, colleagues and Premier. The next opportunity is the green bricks. SMME opportunities with bricks from glass and demolition waste. So the climate change significance, manufacturing cement contributes about 8% global CO2 emissions, and C&D waste make up 35% of all global waste. We have a process called the key brick, and the key brick fits together like a Lego block. So if it fits together like a Lego block, there's no need to put some mortar in between the courses. There's absolutely no need. And because this block is compiled or formed through a compression, hydraulic compression, the amount of cement that we use in the block also is reduced. We managed to construct a 40 square meter low cost housing structure, which we put up in 11 days. We erected that structure in 11 days. It took 4 days to do the foundation and get that cured, and then 7 days to get us to roof height. And we used approximately 4,000 of these blocks. That's an example of the block on the right-hand side. For all intents and purposes, it's a circular material because the replaceability using the technology that we're utilizing, we're actually replacing 67 to 70% of the block with recovered glass. I'm sure colleagues, everybody has seen the glass that's sitting in the environment, which is not being collected because we're almost 600 kilometers from Gauteng. So this product is a solution to that problem. Also, construction demolition waste, which is hardly getting recovered or recycled, can be incorporated into this material. This is the problem. We have people living in abodes which are not conducive for them to live in. By last reports, they were saying some 4,000 South African schools still use pit latrines. These can be constructed with the key brick. So in terms of national backlogs, we've got about 2.6 million nationally in terms of houses. This is a circular demonstration project. There's been talk about imminent green procurement legislation coming into place through Operation Pakisa, but we are still waiting for that to come through. Faster building techniques. This building can be erected in 11 days with no bricks, no mortar. If we have a situation that we have a disaster scenario, we can go there and erect the structure, and then we can remove the structure after it's no longer required to another location. So as you can see, the bricks fit together very, very nicely, almost like Lego, and there's no need for cement or mortar between courses. Excuse me. This is the site where we are demonstrating the brick. On the left, demonstrating the moisture content, is the machine, the big green machine on the right-hand side. And as you can see, these are the construction demolition waste crushers on the two on the left-hand side there, the generator, and this is the pan mixer. This is the glass crusher, where we crush the glass into 3 different fractions. And there are those fractions right there, the different aggregates. And at the end of the process, this is the brick which comes out. They're curing on the left-hand side. This was preparation for our RDP structure or low-cost housing structure. We built a form. The form was measured to the right square meterage. We prepared the steel reinforcing. We used a ready mix, but it can be done with also by hand. There's no problem with that. And this is the ready mix being poured. The site was covered for the first 4 days for the form to cure. After curing, it was critical to lay the first course of bricks in perfect alignment. Once you get the first course of bricks aligned properly, the house is up within 7 days to lintel level. This is the internals of the house, and as it shows, we're making preparations for adding the roof. And the roof is going, the roof timbers go on. And as you can see, the roof timbers are being placed. After the roof timbers comes the roof itself. And as you can see, the roof was placed. The walls were finished with bagwash in different patterns, just to show what is possible on the inside of the structure. This is showing some different finishing and some different finishing on the other walls as well. And this is the finished structure. This is the collaborating team, Professor Godfrey, my 2 colleagues, and our donors from the DSTI. So just by way of conclusion, the project successfully demonstrated a low-cost housing structure. So this is not a theoretical project, this is a practical project. We've obtained engineer sign-off on the structure. We are still in process now for certifying the actual brick by Agrement and NHBRC. This process is slow. We're experiencing delays from the side of the certification provider. But yeah, we're in progress nevertheless. So this technology is suitable for unexperienced builders. Obviously, if you have got some awareness in the building construction industry, this is going to assist. It's suitable for small, medium-sized businesses. And that's the end of my presentation, colleagues. Thanks for bearing with me. Regards.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Muswema, for quite a simple and straightforward proposals. The next presenter is Dr. Ngwenya. Dr. Ngwenya. On the climate financing is from WITS, as an independent climate change consultant.
Ngicela wonke umuntu okhona. I would like to acknowledge the Honorable Premier, MECs, Council members, Amakhosi akhona. Your presence is acknowledged and all protocol observed. It is a privilege and honor to present to you today the critical intersection of climate change in our economy, My presentation will have a specific focus on climate finance, challenges and opportunities that are present. So I won't go through the agenda, but this is just basically to structure the presentation for everyone. I would like to just briefly pause. We are seeing higher frequency of repair strains on provincial and municipal budgets. Moving also on to agriculture, we see how extreme weather events, have definitely disrupted agricultural production and impacting crop yield and food security. Again, looking at tourism, and I think I was hoping some of the speakers would maybe touch briefly on the tourism sector, but this has significantly decreased because climate change has resulted in the tourism sector, some places not being aesthetically pleasing. There have been many reports around how Margate, which is seen as the gem of the South Coast, has lost significant business because of the tourism sector. So these are just examples of how climate change is having direct economic effects on various sectors. So the direct financial losses, if you look at the KZN floods of 2022 up until now, billions have been lost. We look at the social and employment impacts, loss of livelihoods, and strategic economic risks. Touching on this, this is a very important slide, and I just want to touch a little bit on it. In 2022, we saw how the GDP contracted by 0.7% in the KZN province. So you look at the first image in the first graph, and 7 out of the 10 industries recorded, a loss, and there was a contraction. And this is poignant, again, to highlight that when an extreme weather happens, there is a direct impact on the various economic sectors. Looking on to figure 2, again, just illustrating how you'd see a dip between 2019 and 2020, and that is directly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the next dips, interestingly enough, have been because of climate change. Again, just illustrating how extreme weather events have direct impacts. And this is the first time, this was released in 2022. And Stats SA released this for the first time, looking at the correlation of climate change on the economic GDP, specifically within the KZN province. Again, looking at some of the sector-specific examples, I think examples are very great to bring it to reality. We look at the manufacturing sector. I'm sure many are aware of the Toyota Perspection plant in eThekwini that was flooded beyond repair. And again, just looking at the agriculture sector, I think many speakers have touched on what's happening within the sector. But again, looking at the sugarcane and macadamia nuts, which were the most affected. So again, illustrating, the negative impacts of extreme weather events on, various economic sectors. Now, moving on to the crux of the conversation is really on climate finance. And so just to briefly sort of just educate everyone around climate finance, in simple terms, we look at how is money mobilized domestically, internationally, to fund various climate projects. So these climate projects predominantly would be your mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation would look at things like how do we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, so things like renewable energy. And then adaptation would be, your infrastructure to increase vulnerability, to decrease rather vulnerability to climate change, and also investing in things like drought-resistant crops and flood defenses. And there are two sources of where we get financing from. So the first one is domestic. So domestic would look at local. So we would look at our DFIs, development finance institutions. We'd look at our banks. We'd look at our national budgets through National Treasury. The second part, we'd look at, international. So this is where we'd look at things like, your climate funds, your World Banks, your European Union, etc. So setting the scene, globally, there's about $1.3 trillion which has been invested in climate-related activities. But we are far below the target that we need. We need about $4.6 trillion a year. And this is based on, the various COP commitments in the Paris Agreement. So we are way below what is needed on an annual basis in order, to fund climate change globally. In South Africa, just a quick snapshot, and I will go into detail more in upcoming slides, but we receive most of our domestic financing from your Green Climate Fund, your development banks, bilateral partners, etc. I will elaborate this more in detail. So currently, we have various sources of funding. We have, your National Treasury. So your National Treasury, they allocate budgets for adaptation and mitigation. We have your DBSA, where they look at infrastructure finance, climate-focused funds, your Industrial Development Corporation. They look at green manufacturing, renewable energy. We've got your Land Bank, based in Pretoria, that looks at sustainable agriculture financing. You've got your commercial banks as well. Banks are very big on climate funding. These looks at your Nedbank, your Standard Bank. We also have your private equity. And the nice thing about the financing is that it's, we have the policies that also support this. So you've got your Just Energy Transition Plan that was spoken around by Ms. Dora Modisa yesterday. You've got your carbon tax, which was also spoken, about earlier this morning, climate change bill. But as much as we have the policies which do support the financing, there are massive gaps and challenges that we also need to address and fix in order for us to leverage properly financing. One of those is fragmentation. There's a huge public perception that when a disaster happens, the amount of money that is meant to be allocated to communities, there's a lack of transparency and accountability as how is that money distributed. So it's one, how is the money distributed, and two, who is responsible for distributing that money? So those are key challenges that we need to address. Second of all, there's capacity constraints. The Auditor General, I'd just like to share with everyone, in 2023, the Auditor General South Africa released a report where they looked and they audited and they looked at various just outcomes of the KZN floods. And one of the things that they mentioned is that a lot of the policies, especially when we look at disaster management, are still in a draft phase. And there's a lack of expertise, knowledge, in order, to do things like project preparation and to disperse funds. So there was a delay in several people receiving funds because of the lack of expertise in various municipalities. So that's something that really should be tackled. And things like equity and access. So rural and small municipalities struggle to access funds. So these are just some of the gaps and challenges that should be highlighted that we can potentially address. So moving on specifically, looking at the role of DFIs. DFIs in South Africa, so they have a public mandate to finance development. So they are mandated for that. It is their responsibility. So if we look at, and obviously, as I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are two DFIs that are really making impacts in the country in terms of domestic finance. We have your DBSA. DBSA, their mandate is to finance infrastructure and socio-economic development projects in SA and SADC. Their climate finance role, they are partnered with the Green Climate Fund, and they provide blended finance and technical assistance for climate resilient, infrastructure. Examples can include things like climate smart transport projects, renewable energy, etc. We also have your Industrial Development Corporation, your IDC. They are mandated to promote industrial capacity and economic growth through financing. So some of the climate finance role that they have is investing in green industry and funding climate resilient value chains in agriculture, in things like your forestry and manufacturing. So some of the case studies from the DFIs, and this is just to bring it home a bit. In 2022, IDC had a 500 million flood relief fund. And really what this fund really was created to do is to assist, businesses that were, disrupted and could not be operational, to assist, township traders and informal businesses, schools and health centers. And so this is an example of a DFI which is mobilizing and allocating money, to assist with, a climate disaster at present. If we also look at the DBSA, the 2022 KZN flood was actually an example of how they actually partnered up with the SADC Regional Climate Resilient Water Investment Program. And this was to unlock technical, financial, and institutional barriers, to finance infrastructure, damage that had happened in the province. So again, looking at how our DFI is mandated to promote development, but also partnering up with other institutions in order to effect and ensure change. Looking at international climate finance opportunities, again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lots out there, but these are just examples. So you've got your Green Climate Fund, you've got your disaster risk financing and insurance program through the World Bank Group, you've got your global environment facilities, and you have your climate investment funds. Now, going specifically, looking at the case studies, I'd like to highlight the first one, which is the Africa Green Resilient and Inclusive Housing De-risking Facility. This is the first of its kind ever in climate financing, because this facility is geared towards climate resilient housing. The previous speaker spoke around the housing backlog. Just even this year, looking at the floods that have been happening in the province, where it is shocking to see how, informal settlements are destroyed and it creates a housing backlog again, but seeing how people then take residence plots. And that speaks to an even bigger issue. So tapping into such facilities and developing, potential opportunities, we can, address the housing issue, but also ensure that there's climate resilient housing that is implemented. The next part, where we look also at just case studies of international financing, you look at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And to even bring it home as a practical example, recently they sponsored Capricorn District Municipality in Limpopo, where they funded some of the climate adaptation projects. Interestingly, about the UNDRR, they don't just fund, give away money for projects. They make sure that there is capacity and stakeholder engagement and skills development to ensure that the municipal workers or whoever's responsible, is able to manage that money efficiently and ensure that, there are proper reporting guidelines and monitoring around the money. So just an example of how can KZN leverage on these opportunities. So I did just an exercise looking at an opportunity map. And the map that you see in front of you is looking at where do some of the opportunities lie. So for example, Umkanyagude and Ulundi and Herigwala are almost like high risk, climate risk opportunities. The higher the risk, the higher the investment potential. And if we can look at, the facility that I spoke around in terms of the housing, that we can develop a project preparation where we take it to this facility and state that these are the high risk areas, but they also have the highest investment potential. So how can the KZN province leverage is align with provincial housing and climate strategies. So we need to ensure that all new housing projects adopt climate risk-informed designs. We need to bridge the affordable housing gap and ensure that we have resilient, energy-efficient homes. But also, this is an opportunity to showcase KZN as a model for green, resilient housing, especially in flood-affected areas. So opportunities and recommendations for council, and I think, the previous speaker spoke around low-hanging fruit. And leveraging on public-private opportunities is definitely low-hanging fruit. If we look at companies, for example, like Santam is an insurance company, and they have already been doing a lot of work on early warning systems. And KZN partnering up with Santam, that's already low-hanging fruit in terms of how can they also use their early warning systems, as pilot projects, throughout the province. If you look at Infrastructure South Africa, they had a conference in Cape Town, and for the first time ever, they actually, spoke around the need to build climate-resilient infrastructure and looking at partnerships between those two. We look at, our telecoms like Telkom, and, yesterday there was a lot of talk around how when there's a disaster that happens, our tower networks are disrupted. And looking at how we can partner up with our telecoms, companies in terms of how can they offer their services and partner with us. And obviously your banks as well, your likes of your ABSA, your Nedbank, your Investex, they're doing a lot on disaster funding. And if you think in business, this is a win-win situation. So it looks good in terms of their management and their PR as well, but also as a province, we also benefit. So recommendations is really to establish a climate change public-private partnership platform. Premier, I'm happy to put up my hand and engage with your office and the team to lead on this as well. We need to identify priority sectors for investments and really partnering with development finance institutions. Similarly, again, with pipeline development for bankable projects, developing a project preparation unit, ensure that we also partner up with our academics and local business to identify bankable projects. Just to elaborate further on the key action recommendations, I think what needs to be done is really to develop a climate finance roadmap and stakeholder mapping as well. And responsible stakeholders, I think this is multidisciplinary. I don't want to pin it to one because there are multiple stakeholders, and I think this is something that is seen across all the speakers as well. When we look at timelines, this is ranging from short, medium, and long-term timelines in order to ensure that there's project preparation, technical assistance, and that we can propose to our DFIs and international funders for money. And I think lastly, just on conclusion, just a recap, I really do want everyone to understand that climate change is not just about the environmental impacts and the social impacts. There are strong economic impacts, not only present, but going forward. Climate finance offers us a solution in order for us to address, adaptation and mitigation and projects. And really just the call of action is that we must, as a province, position ourselves as a climate resilient and investment ready province, leveraging our unique strength to ensure that funding drives sustainable development and inclusive growth, even in the midst of extreme weather and uncertain impacts of climate change. Thank you very much.
What a wow. A good presentation, especially when you talk about money. You are bringing practical solutions, and on your volunteering to see my office, I accepted. Even today we can arrange as to when. It's a pity that the chief of staff is outside, but I know that they will tell her to make it a point that she arranges that we meet soon. Well, as an opportunity for discussion on the presentations, I look on my left for hands. I see MEC Mayor, Ms. van Rensburg, Mr. Nkontwane, only 3 from the left, and the right, there's none. Each one is allocated less than 1 minute. Over to you.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. 4 presentations in 1 minute, but I'll try. I'll start with the first presentation. Just a few questions. This is not criticisms, please. This is just me trying to understand more and the situation. I mean, most of the trees used in plantations are not indigenous trees because our trees are not tall enough and like me, not straight enough. So it's something that worries me because these trees tend to be a bit more thirsty than ours. So how should the industry, first of all, be regulated with water use, but also what can be the offsets that we can do to try and mitigate that? Also, how do we balance food security with our need for wood products? Because land is actually at a premium in South Africa. So how do we, just because food security is something that we're continuously concerned about. And then also besides job creation, how do communities benefit from this type of wood projects and plantations? On the second one, recycling and reuse is very important, Honourable Premier, but education alone is not enough. In a country of exceptionally high unemployment and poverty, people need an economic incentive to reuse and recycle. We all know about the paper collectors, Honourable Premier. I feel they are quite often exploited. So again, the same question, should government regulate this sector, the reuse and recycling sector? And how can we create more economic benefit, something real, tangible for people? Because at the end of the day, that's what people care about in South Africa. On the third presentation, especially with housing, alternative building materials, there's a lot of pushback from communities. And I know in the past, eThekwini tried to use alternative bricks, and the community refused to take ownership of those homes or move in. So how do we tackle that? What type of education is needed? How do we sell the idea of not the traditional cement and brick RDP houses, but different types of materials, especially in the human settlements environment? And the last one, I'm within my minute. One thing that I missed in those recommendations in the end is, and something I really struggle with, Premier, is a coordinating body that assists with accessing funding. Wherever I go, people tell me, oh, but this fund is available, or that fund is available, or there's a 1% loan that the European Union provides, but no one knows about it. So we in KZN are not accessing those funding because we just don't know it exists. And I'm struggling within the department. We're trying to get all that information together, but it's really, really hard. So I do think we need a coordinating body within the province, maybe Honourable Premier, or nationally, that just deals with funding, finding funding, accessing funding, and then helping departments and NPOs, NGOs, and private companies to access that funding. Thank you, Honourable Premier.
Yeah, it was 1 minute. Well, I think for the last question, Dr. Ngwenya has already provided a way forward. We'll move from that premise. Then Ms. van Rensburg.
Okay, I'll have to give you a set of written questions because I have a lot, but maybe I should premise this by saying one of my key concerns in this country is the democratization of science and how we do that. So there are different kinds of information. When I'm a profit-driven company, I give you a marketing information. When I go to your community, there's no need to sign a consent form. I give you the information I want you to hear in order that you can in order to convince you to buy my product. From a science perspective, what we're trying to instill is critical thinking, which means you need to make a decision based on the best available information and in full context and having all the knowledge. And just in that, I have to say I am not against the forestry sector. But a lot of the information that was provided earlier needs to be taken in context, and some of it was slightly inaccurate. What I do need to explain is if you could think of the link between, what is the link between biodiversity, carbon, soil, hydrology, and climate? You might not think they're interlinked, but they are. So the more diverse your system is, if you've got a very diverse system, your indigenous systems, they've got very diverse routing systems. Your routing systems is where most of your carbon gets put into the soil. The soil has got the highest, in terms of the terrestrial environment, the highest place where carbon is sitting is in your soil. It's your biggest asset, not above ground, below ground. So what you do with your soil and what impacts on your soil is going to be the indicator of the net result is whether your system becomes a source or a sink of carbon. You want your systems to be a sink of carbon. So when you take indigenous vegetation and you convert that to anything else, and especially monoculture, you reduce the capacity of that soil to actually store carbon, and it's a problem. So when you talk carbon, you need to look at it in relation to what you are losing and the long-term net effect of that. And there are lots of studies which show that mixed plantations, so I'm not against plantation, but mixed plantations are actually better for soil carbon, and obviously indigenous vegetation is better. So it's just an important concept in all land use to understand that what we need to protect in South Africa is the soil carbon stock, and we've actually done research to show that even indigenous bush encroachment areas and exotic plantations reduce soil carbon stocks significantly and produce higher CO2 emissions. So it's just, we need to do it, but understand the full context of it. And then the other things, and also it's 8%, it's not 1%, and it's also couching your information in the full information. So service cultures provide far more income for the province. One thing I would like to just, in terms of the how do we get the social, I wanted to respond to that as well. How do we get social, why do we always put these technologies into RDP houses? As politicians or as wealthy estates, why don't we start there? You know, if all the estates, these fancy private exclusion estates, were using these environmentally friendly products, then it becomes a socially acceptable thing. If I was sitting in a poor rural community and you're trying to give me something that nobody else is using, why would I want to use it? So lead by example, and that might just be a strategy, like I said yesterday, is implement these things with the people who have the economic power to do it so it does become socially acceptable. And I wanted to check whether everybody knows there's a GEF meeting happening next week here in KZN on climate, that there's a massive grant that's coming through SANBI, and it's for coastal communities. I unfortunately cannot be there. I really wish I could. I don't know, are people here aware of that meeting? You're not? I will write to them and make sure the Premier's office gets invited, because it's crucial. It's a massive, it's funding that's been secured for coastal communities. And yeah, so I'll stop there, but yeah, I want to appeal to us and to our people in South Africa and to the decision makers to understand the democratization of science and the way of science. And when it's a profit-driven, I've seen so many times communities who've been, so as researchers we have to go in and sign consent forms, ethics, full disclosure. So on that, what I'd like to recommend in terms of hardcore actions, EIAs in the province. Any EIA, could there please be a compulsory clause within those that all the data collected from those EIAs become state property? Because what happens is with consultants, they'll go and they'll do work, they get paid a fortune for it by whoever's written up the contract, but you never had access to that data. On that note, sorry Jane, I'm going to ask that the forestry company makes their data open access. They have huge amounts of research funding, huge amounts of data. It's not open access data. Sorry, I know it's a big one and I know they'll say no, but I'm going to ask anyway. And there was one more thing I had. Oh yeah, in terms of the forestry industry as a sector, I've had to field questions in rural areas around why are you saying we can't get water user licenses when multinational, international companies and corporates within South Africa have got those licenses? It's a very real issue. There's an equity redress in terms of water user licenses where emerging businesses, black businesses in South Africa, cannot get water user licenses for their forestry because the whole water sector is oversubscribed. So it is a real issue. And I'd like to raise it. It was raised in the Tembe community, so I'm just bringing voice to that particular dynamic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nkontwane.
Thank you very much, Honorable Premier and Honorable MECs and the members of the Council present. Honorable Premier, I'll ask a few questions and make requests and respond to some of the issues that have been raised here because we're involved in some of the programs. I think the first one just been raised on EIAs. I think we may have a private discussion with the first speaker because we're involved in that process and see how we can deal with it because it's a national competency. On some B1, we are involved because it's driven by national office, so we can share that information. I think for me, Honorable Premier, the first issue is the issue of the national data mine contributions for 2025-2030, which has been done by the country, which is between 360 to 420 carbon equivalent. I will direct this to Mr. Montana because probably if they can assist us as to how we can make a contribution as this province, because if we do not make a contribution to the GSG, I think it's not going to be clear as to why we exist as a council, and I think we need to work on that. We had a discussion on Wednesday where we're working in preparation for the COP30, and my view is that we must be seen to be making a contribution because we're highly affected by the climate change. The presentation made by Ms. Jane Moloney, we really do appreciate that. We have been requested to plant 10,000 trees, and I would like to partner with your good self because we don't have money as a province, and we want to meet the target. And part of the trees that must be planted include the fruit trees, just to deal with the issue of food security. There's been also a discussion or a presentation on pollution. I just want to take it home because it's a presentation I was making yesterday. As a province, we do have a problem with pollution. We only have 19 ambient stations, of which 6 are owned by ourselves, but others are not really working because municipalities do not have capacity. We are reaching out to the stakeholders that are here if they can work with us so that we can monitor the pollution of our air because it causes diseases. The third issue is the issue of the climate smart agriculture, which is a key issue because it's unfortunate that my colleague from agriculture is not here. If we can work together around an ideal smart agriculture for at least farmers in the province, I think that multi-stakeholder engagement will be critical for us to make sure that we are food secure. The issue, the last point will be on circular economy. I know, Honorable Premier, we're trying, but we need to have more industries, and SMMEs are struggling to establish their own industries, especially with regard to waste, turning waste to wealth. And I think the issue of accessing those funds will assist SMMEs and cooperatives in order to grow the economy in the villages and small towns. That's where we can make a mark. And my appeal is that let's work around that. Dr. Ngwenya, thank you very much for your presentation. You also touched on the issue of sugarcane. We just had the presentation from South African Sugar Association. They are diversifying now because sugarcane is not making them to be sustainable. We may need to work with them, and I've made a request, Honorable Premier, that they come and present to the EXCO on their diversification program, which is in line with the master plan. And I hope that once that is done and EXCO has given a direction, we'll be able to work together with the colleagues that are willing to assist us. Thank you very much, Honorable Premier.
Thank you. There are 2 hands from the visual platform. It's one that I cannot see. Who are the hands for? Sorry?
Honorable Minister, Honorable Premier, is Tim Fashion's hand, sir.
Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I just want to commend my colleague on the presentation of food waste. There's something called food rescue, whereby food that are still palatable, that have not been expired, are collected from restaurants, from food houses, and then they are given to some charities, to those who need them. That is also part of food waste management. When I was in the department, we actually started that. We identified some charity and we identified some food houses, whereby we could get this food and give to the people. So I just want to add that to my colleague's presentation, that we should look at food rescue, because it is also a way of preventing methane, of reducing the amount of methane that will be produced if that food waste is taken to the landfill site. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. There is the second hand. Over to you.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. It's Shannon Moffat from the National Business Initiative. I'm particularly interested in Mr. Muswema's presentation on the recycled bricks. It's something we're looking at together with the Mr. Price Foundation on textile and plastic waste going into bricks. So my question to him would be, what are the constraints in terms of approval for the bricks to be used in building, in terms of building regulations, etc.? I note the MEC's concern with the use of such bricks in government housing programs, and I also note the comment about leading by example. I think that's a really good point. The thing that we would be most interested in is SMME opportunities around that, how feasible the bricks are compared to conventional bricks, etc., and the capital infrastructure required. But in terms of government creating an enabling environment, We see what the legislation around plastic waste has been. They legislated that a certain percentage of plastics have to be made with recycled plastics. It's created a whole value chain. It's created employment opportunities and income to the informal waste collectors. My question would be, would it assist or would government consider mandating in the construction industry that a certain percentages of bricks must be made from recycled waste? That would certainly create the opportunities and make SMME development more viable. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all the inputs and questions. I'm not quite sure whether there is an appetite to respond to some of them. I will see by a show of hand to the presenters. Ms. Moloni.
It's okay, Premier. I'm used to being called Mrs. Mapoloni. It is indeed how you spell it. Okay, answering the questions, I guess.
I'm sorry, Ms. Moloni.
Sorry.
Mr. Mswema also wishes to give an input or a question before you respond.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. So I just wanted to respond just to some of the questions that were raised. From the floor, there seems to be some pushback in terms of alternative building materials. But it depends on, you know, if the money is coming out of my pocket and I'm building a structure, then I want to save money. And I want to erect a structure as quickly as possible. If we can build a structure to roof level within 7 days, so I beg your pardon, within 11 days, and the cost of that structure is reduced, and if that money is coming out of my pocket, I want to make sure that I'm making a savings at the end of the day. Now, of course, if the money is coming out of the fiscus or somebody else's pocket, and then if I open my mouth and say, I want this kind of a house, I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's an appropriate thing for our communities to be doing. Yes, they've got a choice, but in these days, where the last speaker commented that we're facing 33% unemployment, do we really have a choice? Do we really have that choice? And then there was another question about let's start with the rich communities. Let's build or get buy-in from the affluent. So to date, we've also, what I'm neglected to show in the presentation is the fact that we've constructed an industrial shed. In fact, I'm going to put pictures in the chat room for people to see. We've constructed a shed which is going to be used for e-waste. E-waste sorting, an industrial shed, using 11,000 of the same bricks. I don't know why it's not adding now for some reason. Just trying to add, give me a second. Yeah, it's not allowing me, I don't know why. Anyway, yeah, so yes, we are definitely targeting the affluent as well. The bricks, actually, we've used them to also form paving. So that's another alternative use. And I just wanted to close off on, there was a speaker who mentioned inserting a requirement for recyclable content. This was rumored to have been in or being developed in the last 2.5 years. And if we do get a requirement that most of the bricks or building materials must have a certain recyclable content, it will actually make takeoff of this block actually very, very successful. So that's just the 3 comments I just wanted to make, colleagues.
Thank you, Ms. Moloni.
Thank you very much, Premier. Martin, first up, you asked about our water regulation. We already have very, very good water regulation, and we do abide by it. From an offset perspective, farming trees, if you look at maize, canola, wheat, to name a few, if you drive through the Western Cape where you see those, when they are not growing, it is barren, 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 barren. Eucalyptus trees, yes, they are offset by 25 to 30% of the land is set aside for biodiversity. You have corridors where you'll see that there's a great deal of indigenous bush, and the grasslands are protected. So from that perspective, yes, they are looked after. And I do believe that the forestry companies are very good stewards of their land. You'll see that there are a number of conservation areas, up to 9, where they are actually managed and looked after by the companies. So from a 1.2 million hectares perspective, Sue, I'm not sure what your 8% was referring to, but there's only 1.2 million hectares, of which 25 to 30% is for biodiversity. Does not amount to 8% of our country's land. Okay, no, I'm talking about the whole country. So that's a misleading statement to make, because I was referencing the entire country. And 3% water use was referenced by our illustrious professor from WITS earlier as well. So that is a statistic that is out there. From a benefit to communities, in deep rural areas, you wouldn't have clinics, you wouldn't have roads, you wouldn't have schools. We've partnered with the NBI. I heard Shannon from the NBI, and we've partnered with the NBI to run courses like becoming a plumber, becoming a builder, bricklaying, those kind of very practical skills. So it means that within your community, you can earn money from things other than just from the trees. Then you also have, in fact, the gentleman on my right, Mr. Mkontwana, sort of started answering the question because he talked about smart agriculture. You can also grow ground nuts and other products in between your trees when they're young and when they're coppicing. So, yes, you do need to sustainably manage your plantations, but I am concerned with the implication that the relationship between the communities and the companies is something that is not a good thing. And I don't believe that that is the case. So I'm happy to have a conversation with the professor outside the room, with you, Sue, with the hair doctor professor. From a science perspective, I was upfront and said I'm not a scientist. So, yeah. I can refer you on soil carbon to a number of papers, which I will provide to you. And I think that much of what you say can be refuted scientifically, not just with emotion and passion and facts. Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you. I know that the conversation will not end here, as there will be another engagement outside. Well, thank you very much. Can we then proceed to the next presentations? The first one by Ms. Sharma from the community-based disaster, or on the community-based disaster management plans from UKZN.
Thank you so much, and good morning to the Honourable Premier, Honourable MECs, our respected traditional leaders and council members. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and I am deeply humbled to be sharing community-based disaster management plans and just some of the work that I've been looking at in eThekwini. This is just a brief outline of the presentation, and it's based on some of my research at the university as well as community engagements. So very quickly, I just want to bring to our attention that when we talk about disaster management, it plays a critical role to the trajectory of South Africa's environmental future. What I thought is particularly significant is that we keep speaking about climatic events, but in the research that I've seen, South Africa has a high propensity for both extreme weather events, and this is exacerbated by the hazardous nature of our industrial hotspots. We know that there are sufficient policy frameworks, and in South Africa, and particularly in eThekwini, we use a command and control structure. So we go from bronze to silver and then gold. But of course, we're seeing that it's very difficult to implement these command and control structures because the spatial geography of each city, each neighborhood, and each suburb differs, and also the communities differ. So what we have found in eThekwini, and I've been looking and working with communities in South Durban, is that civic activism, civic responsibility, and indigenous knowledge systems have played an instrumental role in producing practical disaster management plans on the ground. And if there's anything that I've been humbled by during, working with communities and my research, it's that the communities best know their surroundings. They do not need to be told what to do. We do not need to impose knowledge on them. They know their schools, their temples, their churches. They know the best evacuation routes. So I've been very humbled to observe and work with both the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance and the Mia West Community Foundation. Now, just talking on climatic events, and some more updated research was presented. I just took some of this information from previous presentations. But again, we see by virtue of our geography, Southern Africa, and then of course South Africa, the high propensity for extreme weather events, floods, at 254 floods from 1980 all the way to 2016, and I see that has been updated in studies later on. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that. Again, just to show you that we are flood prone here in KwaZulu-Natal. Enough information has been presented on that, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. And then the industrial incidents in South Durban. Now, my research has shown that between 2004 and 2010, for example, just from the petrochemical refineries alone, communities in South Durban between the period 2004 and 2010 have experienced approximately 15 industrial disasters. But if we track from 1998 to 2022, just in Durban, these communities have experienced 189 industrial disasters in that period. So the spatial vulnerability of communities is important for us to look at. This community, or the first community-based organization, the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, SETSI, they came up with an emergency plan in 2008. Now, it doesn't necessarily look like this, but they've described protective strategies as well as preparedness measures. So, for example, they have recommended the shelter in place, which says that everybody should stay at home, or as far away from the danger points as possible. We should have our emergency materials, so should refineries explode, it doesn't mean we must exit our homes immediately. You seal off vents, or you stay indoors where you do not, you are not exposed to the harmful, toxic, and noxious emissions that are coming from the refineries. They've spoken to community leaders to devise communication systems, emergency kits where your most essential items are carried. That could be anything like baby food, your identity documents, your medication, etc. And then resident level preparedness measures where they then try to forge a relationship with government representatives as well as the road traffic inspectorate, Metro Police to cordon off, for example, the M4 Tara Road and Marine Drive. So should any of these industrial disasters take place, they can exit. This area experiences a lot of traffic and they get sort of locked in because of the trucks as a result of the industrial economy situated in this area. So it is difficult, but nevertheless, I have looked at this as a basis in my research because it was a community in the city that started to devise their own disaster management plan. Later on in 2022, the Mia West Community Foundation came up with a little bit more comprehensive disaster management plan based on where the gaps were in the previous, with the previous experiences. They then looked and identified the different risks in South Durban, according to the companies, Engen, Sapref, Lanxess, with the chromium-6 soil pollution, where they had to close off a school and they couldn't attend school for about 2 weeks. There's Ilovo Sugar, the trucks and the tankers, Mondi, which all present different environmental and industrial risks to the community. They then came up with slightly more comprehensive preparedness measures. They now have seen disaster management as micro level. So it's not just a piece of paper, it's very on the ground, talking to each other, looking at different roads, going door to door. I think Prof. Sutherland was here yesterday and she mentioned that they have to go door to door to get information. This community has already done that. They've gone door to door on each road, found out the name of each resident, who are the vulnerable communities. So that means your elderly, your disabled, your children, who in the event would need assistance from SAPS and Metro, indigenous knowledge systems, voluntary businesses and security companies to come together and say, hey, we need this, we need to get this to work. They've then elected road leaders. So when the disaster is taking place, each road leader or road leaders are assigned to a road. They go to each of those residences and they say, come, let's go to our EAPs, emergency assembly points. They have established relationships with schools, and we're going to look at that just now, they then, with those schools, have long blasts or signals for evacuation and evacuation. Evacuation, again, means to stay indoors. Sometimes in a disaster, it's common for everybody to run outside because we think that that's safety. But actually, this community has proven to stay inside sometimes is the safer option. Or evacuation, and then they've got the blasts there. So it's 3 long blasts for evacuation, 2 long blasts to wait for further instruction. They then said emergency go bags, so your essential documents, medication, food items. And I thought what was interesting here was that they said, because of previous disasters, certain youth and women got fragmented from their families. So they've asked you to take a strand of hair. They've got an emergency piece of paper where you fill in, which family you belong to, your ID number, and you put that strand of hair into the plastic bag that they've provided, so that later on they've established a relationship with the forensics department in SAPS. They can actually try and identify, your family. And my friend here, Dr. Nkosi, who will know more about the medical information than me. They've gone and, as I said, established relationships with schools. They've divided their suburb or their neighborhood into 2 precincts at the bottom. They've called, one is called the Navy cluster, the other one is called the Chinatown cluster. In there, they've identified an emergency assembly point, that's what EAP stands for, and that is where the community will assemble in the event of a disaster. So if you look at the Chinatown precinct, they've come up with 7 different evacuation routes. On each of those evacuation routes, there are road marshals to help residents move away towards their designated EAP. One is the Himalayas Road Ground, one is the Ganges Secondary EAP, and one is the Alipore Primary EAP. And what I want to say in this regard is schools, sports grounds, parks, etc., they are very amicable to becoming EAPs and assisting residents in terms of their safety during a disaster. And then, of course, on the other side, Navy as well identified the Punjab Circle EAP, 8 evacuation routes. And what I want to bring to your attention is in cases like the Sialkot Crescent, which is demarcated in purple here, is that when roads have a very long length, then they have more than 1 or more than 5 road marshals to assist and more than 1 disaster local champion to assist. So my work is more centered around strengthening local capacity, because one thing I can say coming from the university, and sometimes academics get a little bit offended when I say this, but certification is not the only form of education. Communities know about disaster management. They know about climate change. They know the environmental science. These communities will speak the science better than me. So I've been very humbled. I'm not going to go through all the text in the interest of time, but based on what I've been observing in the city, and I want to make this very clear, we're talking about ward-specific management, neighborhood-specific management. It is not a blueprint. It is simply an exemplar framework which we can take to our communities and adapt it to their spatial geographies and adapt it to their cultures. Okay? So we need to elect in our communities, whether it is at the neighborhood level, whether it is at a local level, whether it is at a ward level, you will know based on the size of where you come from, local champions and disaster management representatives to work with the local municipalities. In the eThekwini municipality, we have what is called the DMAF, the Disaster Management Advisory Forum. There are representatives of the community, but it is not to the extent at which we would like to see it. So we want every road marshal, every local champion to say, hey, we're going to be a part of this advisory forum because we need everyone, or we need the municipality to know what's happening on our road. They then generate and draw up a database. Who's on your road? How many women? How many children? How many disabled? Who needs help in terms of SAPS and Metro so that we can allocate the institutional resources as it is needed. Then I've got the empowered ward councillors. It can be empowered, community leaders. It can be empowered municipal officials. You can adapt it and adjust it to your spatial geography. And I said participatory EAP mapping because in as much as I can map like this, I know that communities know their local schools. They know their local churches. So they need to come and on board and say, hey, our church is near to my community, our schools are here, this is the most effective route towards this church, this is the most effective route towards this school, come on board and help us with the mapping. And I've then said street level evacuation planning, meaning this is the part where we generate this database. Who's on the road? If the road is a very long road, is one road leader going to be enough? And the answer is no, we may need 5 road leaders. Okay, then it's fine. And so we plan at the street level. So you can see very micro level, going to the door, going to the street. That is how we have to practically implement disaster management. And then I've got the local leadership and ward-specific management. Again, this can be adapted to suit the spatial geography of whether we're talking about a precinct, a neighborhood, ward, etc., or a city, because you cannot have a city-wide disaster management plan, because how do you implement that in every single part of the city? Umhlanga's geography is totally different to South Durban's geography. So we cannot have one plan for the whole city. That's why I suggest to have it at a neighborhood level, and I think eThekwini municipality in town planning, they refer to it as honeycomb cluster, where we have some sort of a plan to say, yes, we identify risks, yes, we identify preparedness measures, these are essential things for disaster management, but we implement it to what suits the neighborhood or the culture of the community, if it's in a rural area, or the geography of a rural area. And then the operational responsibilities of local leadership. In other words, we empower the the disaster management advisory liaisons to know that this is very much their civic responsibility. So in South Africa, constitutional obligation to fulfill our civic responsibility to this country. In other words, disaster management and environmental problems are not only for the government and us as environmental scientists. If there's anything, I can tell you, communities are part of the knowledge creation process. They are showing us this, for example, in the city. I've put SAPS Metro Police, it's just to guide people towards EAPs. It's a safety thing. I've noted their local champions, road marshals, and that's just a summary, a diagram that I've drawn up for my research, just to summarize what I've observed, so that when we are looking and when we are trying to draw up our own community-based disaster management plans, that we know, do we definitely have preparedness measures? Do we definitely have representatives who are going to assist us? Do we have that strengthened local capacity? And one of the reasons I'm passionate about this is because when we looked at the floods, or when you look at industrial disasters, any disaster, if you strengthen local capacity, it will complement the institutional resources, it will complement the institutional capacity. So we really need to look at this as a complementary approach to environmental governance and disaster governance. I put this up here. It was a presentation that I did in 2022, and I've taken the information at the time from National Treasury, just to say that this disaster management plan, as I mentioned early on, or community-based disaster management plan, it's not a blueprint, as I said. We just we extract the important concepts and we adapt it and synchronize it to suit our communities. My concern, of course, is informal settlements. My concern, of course, is rural communities, where we need people to go out there and say, hey, we want to work with you. We want to identify evacuation routes. We want you to help us identify emergency assembly points. How can we do this? Please help us. This is what we definitely need to have. And the community will gladly, come on board and say, look, we are happy to share this information about our neighborhoods, our suburbs with you. Again, that was taken from a previous presentation. It was just a list of stakeholders that I put together. At the time, I was doing a presentation on the KwaZulu-Natal floods for national government because for UKZN. And one of the things that I wanted to put forth was that we talk about, a policy. So the policy is delineated by a philosophy. Our philosophy here is disaster management. And that disaster management philosophy feeds into a policy. But out of a policy comes a procedure, which is what I've been showing you earlier on, that micro level procedure where we say, hey, where do I go if there's a disaster in my area? And then you can name your local church. How do I go there? Now, my road leader comes and SAPS monitors this. And what are we doing for vulnerable communities or, marginalized communities? And then we have the answers. So it's certain questions that we put forth. Thank you for this table, Honorable Premier. It was only just a summary of everything that I've said. I put the action there. At the center of my passion and my research is communities, because I've been humbled by what they can do. The strength lies in that. What I want to conclude by saying is that the disasters are not going to end. It is not only a South African problem. This is all over the world. Whether we are talking about industrial disasters, because we are a thriving economy and a thriving democracy, naturally petrochemical refineries, factories will have these problems. Because of climate change, we are going to see more pronounced spatio-temporal variabilities in the city when it comes to these climatic events. But what I do want to say is that the exchange of knowledge between our stakeholder and the different agents and enhances community participation. That then will strengthen the capacity of our institutions. I want to also say that, and I wrote it, I think, in the fourth point there, is that sometimes we cannot start with this problem about disaster management at inception. We need to teach our young kids in South Africa about this. These learning about evacuation routes and preparedness measures, it must be integrated into maybe the life orientation curricula at schools. It's something for the Department of Basic Education we can think about, because disaster management is going to become a part of South Africa's future. So we must tackle the issue from inception. It mustn't be something when we grow up now and we're talking to people who are in their 50s and 60s or 30s and 40s, it's difficult to relay. But as a child, if we inculcate and we instill this, it is better going forward in terms of preparedness. The issue is preparedness. I then said that SETSI and MSEF have demonstrated that grassroots activism is essential in community-based frameworks, and that based on what I've seen, I can advise that there are many opportunities for strengthening local capacity in of communities across South Africa. Thank you to all of you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Sharma. You have taken it to another level now. Because we have been saying mitigating. Now we are saying disasters are here to stay. Well, thank you very much. Can we then proceed to Prof. Mkhize on the women in climate change? He will make a presentation with Dr. Makhathini. They are both from MUT. Oh, she will. Not that he will, she will.
Good morning to our Honorable Premier, our MECs, and councillors, and all the leadership that is here, as well as our guests who are also participating in terms of presentation. So it is quite befitting to talk about women in climate change as we are it's Women's Month. And I'll be co-presenting with my colleague here, Dr. Makhathini. I think it's important for me to start by saying that MUT, if you understand the history of KZN, you'll definitely know who is MUT because of the historical significance that MUT has done in unleashing the youth into the industries, because previously disadvantaged communities were not able to go to get other forms of education, and especially technical skills. So MUT played a huge part in opening up the engineering field, as well as the agricultural sector. So you find a lot of youth back in the day who went into contributing to these industries. Secondly, MUT is situated in a township, which is Umlazi, the fourth largest township in the country, as well as it's named after Umlazi, which is the river that has been rerouted. And I think one of the speakers showed the picture of what is happening in the Durban South, where there was those containers that were flying around. So that river is named after the township. So we are right at the heart of some of the issues that are happening both when you go further south and also in terms of what happens internally in the township itself and for the city. So just a bit of background, we are looking at MUT and women in climate change, and then just give you a bit of context and some of the relevance of that in terms of global and national agenda, as well as existing projects and also insights of a way forward. Okay, so this started by our VC. We had our VC that came in 2023, late 2022. So the initiative started in 2023, where we were unpacking the issue of the African agenda, the intercontinental trade. And so when we looked at the Agenda 2063, we said, okay, it's looking at trade and looking at other issues of intercontinental trade, but what does that mean for us in communities? How can we develop an Africa that we want in terms of these streams that, as women, as you can see, the 5 women, are actually contributing within those fields. And so this initiative started with the VC, and then we looked at the 5 streams. For this presentation, we're just going to focus on the zero hunger and the reduced pollution. But this is how it came about, so as that initiative. So coming back to the issue of food security and agriculture, I think a lot of people have spoken about the significance of that. We currently have processes both globally and nationally, as well as locally in terms of the municipality, where we are talking about how do we ensure that we have resilient food systems because of the impact that climate change is having. So at a global level, we have the UN Food Systems Summit that just recently took place that is reinforcing the issue of having to deal with the impact of climate change and building resilient food systems. So we have 4 pathways that all the countries are looking at. And so those pathways, the first one is looking at improving availability of food, production, as well as ensuring the safety of food and the promotion of indigenous food. So that particular pathway, I'm working on the consumption as a thematic lead, but we have that, but we also have a new focus in the country where we're looking at the food and nutrition security plan that needs to be revised to fit into all of these challenges that we are having to deal with in terms of ensuring that people have sufficient, good quality food that's affordable and accessible. So while that is happening, that strategy of the food and nutrition security plan and the food systems pathway under the Department of Agriculture, we also have a requirement to have food strategies as cities. And so the eThekwini is also involved in developing that food strategy to also respond to the challenges around around resilient food systems. So if we look at the 2022 KZN floods, there has been a report that had a very massive impact in terms of the agri-food value chain. I think my colleague did speak about, the previous speaker spoke about it. And so we cannot turn a blind eye on the impact that climate change has in terms of food accessibility and the increasing cost that it has on food, besides the fact that people have to be evacuated from where they are staying, but it means food is going to continue to rise in cost. So as MUT, we have also embarked on building a resilient food system strategy, where we're looking at food and nutrition security initiatives that can be able to respond to these challenges. I think if we can really zoom into that, we'll realize that our youth are the most vulnerable. You know, we cannot just say we're going out to the communities, whereas we have students who are highly dependent on the NSFAS system, who are, you know, just scraping through the month, and yet we have to start at home. Charity begins at home. So we need to also look at strategies that start with us, with the vulnerable youth that we have in universities, and then we go out, obviously. So we had a summit recently, 2024, where we were unpacking these issues around the energy and food nexus, and we are building that focus around that. So we want to focus on the issue of seed quality processing, but also revitalizing the issue of IKS in terms of building these resilient food systems. And if we can look around, I work a lot with some of the markets, people in the markets downtown. You'll see the cost of even our indigenous food has risen sky high because of climate impact. And so if you buy batata now, matumba are extremely expensive. So because of the impact. So IKS, how do we bring all these things together and create foods that can be sustainable using our indigenous knowledge, and obviously creating markets that are going to ensure that. I think just to touch on the issue of us being an academic institution is our curriculum has to be responsive as well, because we are also training students. We just had an extension summit this week, where extension advisors have to respond when they advise farmers. So part of our curriculum is to train students to be extension advisors. And so the curriculum has to also be responsive in giving students these projects that are leading them to be exposed to what is really happening in response to climate change. I think the curriculum before has always just been general, this is what is happening, but there is a need to drive the curriculum more to be responsive to these issues around climate change. So we have been working with our international partners. We work with FAMU, which is a historically disadvantaged, which was previously a historically disadvantaged institution in the US that focuses on agriculture and engineering. And then obviously our key stakeholder is the Department of Agriculture. We've got other stakeholders, but we also want to emphasize the issue of how do we contribute as a university in agri-value chains? Because everybody is buying food. All of us here are buying food at some point, and we are all affected by this. So just to look at the project that we are having with the Ohio State University, we've designed a toolkit, a soil toolkit that wants to capacitate communities on detecting carbon on site. The project is focusing on areas at Ilembe and also the northern Drakensberg area. So the issue here is that promoting sustainable practices is important, but also how do we integrate all these other platforms such as water conservation, the carbon issue, which my colleague will talk about, and also socio-economic opportunities and sustainable development within the community. So this soil kit model assists the local communities not to be constantly doing soil testing, which is which takes time. I mean, the services in the Department of Agriculture for everybody's soil to be tested is not really, it doesn't happen as often as we require. But this gives you access immediately. Coming back to the youth, we are partnering with also the UNICEF in terms of advocacy, because the youth must be involved in climate action. The youth charity must begin at home. So this is the initiative that we have. As you can see, we had started there last year with the UNICEF. Even though they are focusing on nutrition, but there is also the drive towards climate action. Local food system, this would be the second approach to food systems resilience, is that as a university, what are we doing to create a local market? Because we are servicing the southern basin. We've got Mbumbulu, we've got, if you go further south, that's rural and urban, so we're right in the middle. So allowing the university to be a platform to allow for that conversation and that issue around trade and creating markets for farmers is important. But one of the things that I also put forward with the municipality was that we have a university, we've got coastal colleges, but then we don't have nurseries. Everybody must buy seeds somewhere. We don't have anything in our rural areas in terms of seed access or, anything. We have to go again and buy. So we need to look at establishing that within the schools and within these other coastal colleges, and MUT obviously being right at the center for the southern base. So I'm just going to, if you allow me, just a one-clip video of a platform that we've created with the Department of Agriculture to facilitate cheaper access to food within a university system. For now, we're piloting it just for us, but we want to extend it to surrounding communities. I'm not sure why. I don't know if you can.